Ukraine falls, it will be a catastrophe for the West. It will be the end of Western hegemony, end of Western hegemony, of Western hegemony.
Britain's former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has come out publicly and said that if NATO and the Western powers lose the proxy war in Ukraine, it will mean the end of Western hegemony.
If Ukraine falls, it will be a catastrophe for the West. It will be the end of Western hegemony.
Boris Johnson wrote this in a column at the Daily Mail, which is a right-wing tabloid in the UK. Of course, for people who don't know, Boris Johnson was the former Prime Minister of the UK. He was also the Mayor of the City of London, and he was the head of the Conservative Party. And he has a column at the Daily Mail in which he constantly condemns Western boogeymen like China and Russia and demands more military support for Ukraine. And in this column that was published on the 12th of April, Boris Johnson wrote that if Ukraine falls, quote, it will be a total humiliation for the West. He made it clear that this is not just a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's a proxy war between the West and Russia, NATO and Russia. And he said that if Ukraine loses, it will be a massive loss to NATO as a whole, saying it will be the first time in the 75 years of NATO's existence that this hitherto successful alliance has been utterly routed. And again, this is an acknowledgement that this is a proxy war, which many people in the West have denied. Well, he's saying it very openly. And then Boris Johnson wrote, this is the money quote in the article, if Ukraine loses, quote, it will be a turning point in history, the moment when the West finally loses its post-war hegemony. And he warned that this could also be a message to China, and that's why he's been threatening a war over Taiwan in addition to the war in Ukraine.
Jackie Tom. Can we just win the president? Can we take our clothes off? Let's wait for this picture. You just want to show up. Officials, please move aside.
We all have to show them a tough and brutal.
The bare chest and horseback ride is
Oh, yes.
They seem very reliant on accepting Putin's worldview rather than perhaps the stark reality of the barbarism with which he's executed this war.
Yeah, maybe because I know too much about the United States, because the first war in Europe after World War II was the U.S. bombing of Belgrade for 78 days to change borders of a European state. The idea was to break Serbia, to create Kosovo as an enclave, and then to install Bondesteel, which is the largest NATO base in the Balkans, in the Southwest Balkans. So the U.S. started this under Clinton, that we will break the borders, we will illegally bomb another country. We didn't have any UN authority. This was a, quote, NATO mission to do that. Then I know the United States went to war repeatedly, illegally, in what it did in Afghanistan, and then what it did in Iraq, and then what it did in Syria, which was the Obama administration, especially Obama and Hillary Clinton, tasking the CIA to overthrow Bashar al-Assad, and then what it did with NATO illegally bombing Libya to topple Muammar Gaddafi, and then what it did in Kiev in February 2014. I happened to see some of that with my own eyes. The U.S. overthrew Yanukovych together with right-wing Ukrainian military forces. We overthrew a president. And what's interesting, by the way, is we overthrew Yanukovych the day after the European Union representatives had reached an agreement with Yanukovych to have early elections, a government of national unity, and a stand down of both sides. That was agreed. The next thing that happens is the opposition, quote unquote, says we don't agree. They stormed the government buildings and they deposed Yanukovych. And within hours, the United States says, yes, we support the new government. It didn't say, oh, we had an agreement. That's unconstitutional what you did. So we overthrew a government, contrary to a promise that the European Union had made. And by the way, Russia, the United States, and the EU were parties to that agreement. And the United States, an hour afterwards, backed the coup. Okay, so everyone's got a little bit to answer for. In 2015, the Russians did not say, we want the Donbass back. They said peace should come through negotiations, and negotiations between the ethnic Russians in the east of Ukraine and this new regime in Kiev led to the Minsk II agreement. The Minsk II agreement was voted by the UN Security Council unanimously. It was signed by the government of Ukraine. It was guaranteed explicitly by Germany and France. And you know what? And it's been explained to me in person. It was laughed at inside the US government. This is after the UN Security Council unanimously accepted it. The Ukrainians said, we don't want to give autonomy to the region. Oh, but that's part of the treaty. The US told them, don't worry about it. Angela Merkel explained in Die Zeit, in a notorious interview after the 2022 escalation, she said, oh, you know, we knew that Minsk II was just a holding pattern to give Ukraine time to build its strength. No. Minsk II was a UN Security Council unanimously adopted treaty that was supposed to end the war. So when it comes to who's trustworthy, who to believe, and so forth, I guess my problem, Piers, is I know the United States government. I know it very well. I don't trust them for a moment. I want these two sides actually to sit down in front of the whole world and say, these are the terms. Then the world can judge. Because we could get on paper clearly for both sides of the world, we're not going to overthrow governments anymore, the United States needs to say. We accept this agreement, the United States needs to say. Russia needs to say we're not stepping 1 foot farther than whatever the boundary is actually reached. And NATO's not going to enlarge. And let's put it for the whole world to see. You know, once in a while, treaties actually hold.
You might think that this is some kind of circus trick for which he's been specially trained, but not so. He is doing this entirely on initiative. He's seen others doing it and he's copying. And that ability to imitate as well as to use tools is something which started among monkeys but has been brought to a much greater level.